Hey, I'm Will, and I'm a dreamer. Yep. And to be honest, it's caused me a whole heck of a lot of problems. Financial problems. I know it might not look like that right now. I'll explain all of this later. Career problems. Problems holding down a job. Personal problems. Some real fun ones like depression. But the most persistent problem that it's caused is this constant daily battle to pull back my own time. Sometimes I use the word steal it back. It feels like I have to steal my own time back from the need for a day job, the need to work at a day job to pay for my most basic necessities in life, to pay my rent, gotta pay my rent, pay for food, pay for health care. All of the physical stuff, in a way. It seems like I need that paycheck from the day job to pay for my physical existence. To steal back the need to give my time to that and instead be able to keep some of it to work on something that brings me something that's far less physical or not physical at all. It brings me meaning. It's a battle for time between my dreams and my day jobs. And it's a battle I've been fighting now, day after day, for decades. Decades. Yep. Sometimes winning, sometimes losing. And so that's what I want to talk about here. The strategies that I've found useful in this, in the hope that it might help you, presumably a fellow dreamer. For a bit more clarity or context, my dream for many years has been to be a writer. That's the dream I've been pursuing for decades now, sometimes meeting with strong hints of success right around the next corner. Other times, quite often, my writing project's meeting with nothing but silence in response. Nobody cares. But I think, or rather, I hope, that we all have some great dream within us, whether or not we've discovered it yet. Some grand goal for something we want to accomplish with our one shot at being alive. Something that we're driven to from deep within us that we can't deny. So to be very clear, I'm not talking about a hobby here. I'm talking about work, hard, difficult work that we engage in the pursuit of meaning in our lives. So strategy one, it all starts with the hours, reclaiming them, pulling them back, stealing them back from the supposed to-ness of the world. For me, this all started when I was living in New York City, and up until that point in my life, anyone who knew me knew that I was not a morning person. You did not want to talk to Will first thing in the morning. This was true throughout my school days when I was being forced to wake up to go to school, a place I didn't want to go, especially first thing in the morning at least, and became even more true when I started my first real jobs in New York in my early 20s and was forced to get up in the morning and get on that subway and commute with all my fellow New Yorkers and get to the office, and I was miserable in the mornings, grouchy. So when I started trying to pull back an hour here and there to write, I naturally started with the evenings because I was just not a morning person. That wouldn't go well. Why would I want to write while I was so grouchy and upset at the world? But for me, after a full day in the office and a full day of doing the day job, I was always so tired in the evenings. I wasn't able to give the best of myself. My brain just had so little left to give, you know? I'd given at the office. And then I finally got around to reading Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. And honestly, I kept pushing it off because, you know, books that seem like they're in the self-help category or I don't know, just something about it, because I'd heard it, you know, from so many people and things. I just kind of maybe thought of it as cheesy or something. But I read it, and then I loved it. I really fell in love with a lot of the lessons in it. And one that resonated with me quite a bit was the idea of putting first things first. And meaning that if this is your priority, if this is the most important thing for you to do it first. Give it all your energy first, and then let everything else have the leftovers, so to speak. That's not an exact quote. That's sort of my version, I guess. And so I tried it. I said, all right, you know what? I'll try. I'll try getting up a little bit earlier in the morning, and I'll see if I can put first things first and start writing in the morning. And over time of trying this, I started loving getting up in the mornings. I started loving finding these great coffee shops in New York, and I eventually found one that I just settled on, and I said, this is my coffee shop, 100%. And the people that worked there, you know, got to know me and got to know my order, and I would get up on the subway, and I would get to this coffee shop, and I'd write until, and at first I started with an hour, and eventually I moved it up, and sometimes I would get like an hour and a half. Before my alarm would go off, and I'd have to, you know, close up my notebook or my laptop or whatever and make my way a couple more blocks to the office. Sometimes the coffee shop was too close to the office. Sometimes people would come in from the office and say, oh, look at you getting an early start on the day. That's right, I'm sitting here doing my office work. That's what I'm working on. Sure. But the point is that eventually I discovered I am a morning person. I love mornings. And I think half the reason I was so grouchy the whole time is that people were ruining my mornings. That's why I was so mad. I was so mad because I actually love mornings. I want to get up and have them as my own. And these people were stealing my mornings from me. Of course I was pissed off. So now that I'm going to my favorite coffee shop in the morning and giving my first priority 90 minutes of writing every morning, I'm a happy camper in the mornings. I love mornings. You probably do want to say hi to me on the subway. Maybe not. Now, in full honesty, I wasn't always successful at this every single day. I was in my early 20s living in New York City. Back then my favorite clubs were on Tuesday and Thursday nights and didn't get started until midnight or so. I don't know how I did that. And there were plenty of dinners to go to that started also at maybe 10 p.m. So there were plenty of times where I did not get up early enough to do this. But on the days that I succeeded, I was making progress on the thing that mattered to me first. I was able to bang out my first few screenplays this way, and those screenplays were the content that got me into film school. And every single day I did this was 100% success rate, because every single time I did it, the rest of my day was so much better for having done that. I could sit through some boring meetings. I could deal with some annoying things at the office a bit more easily because I knew I had banked that in the morning. I had locked that time in. And my day was a success from the beginning because of that. This, like many of the lessons, is hard work to make happen. You do have to force yourself to get to bed earlier. You do have to cut out a lot of those fun times with friends. You have to choose that this is more important to you. Now, I do have friends that just swear that they are much better writers late in the evening. And of course, another of my favorite books is Stephen King's On Writing, where he famously says that he wrote Carrie, sitting by the washer and dryer in his laundry room, squeezing in, whatever time he could between managing everything else he had to do in life. So that wasn't just first thing in the morning with a nice cup of coffee in a nice coffee shop, right? As King says, put your desk against the wall. I'll talk about that in a moment. This isn't exactly the wall. But you know yourself, and when you are best able to get into flow and to do your best work. So whenever that time is, put first things first and give yourself that hour or maybe even 90 minutes every day. And the progress that you will start making compared to what you were making before will feel like you're moving mountains. This life lesson has been so vital to me and has changed so much of my productivity that I actually just tattooed my symbol for it on my arm, not kidding, to continually remind myself about how important this is. And that's actually another good lesson. I've been doing this for years, and it's still sometimes hard to force myself to do it. And that's just, I think, an essential point about how much focus we have to continue to put on this effort in order to make it happen. All right, so the second strategy, after we figured out how to start grabbing back or stealing back some of our hours in the mornings, is to start figuring out how we can grab an entire day here and there, maybe an entire weekend here and there. And again, this sounds simple at first. We kind of say, oh yeah, I'll get to it this weekend. I'll save my weekend for this project that I want to work on, for my writing, whatever it is for you. And that's not enough. Like saying we'll do it or thinking that's when we'll grab the time to make this happen, it's probably not going to happen, to be honest. It actually takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of planning, I think. It takes intention, it takes willpower to make these things happen, especially during certain times in my life. I'm thinking about the time in my life where this was very difficult to start doing, which was my 20s, living in New York City. And it doesn't sound like as much of a sacrifice to me anymore in life, but when I was in my 20s living in New York City, the idea of saying to myself, I was not gonna go out on a Friday night because I wanted to get up early on Saturday morning and I wanted to get to work, my work. I wanted to spend the whole weekend on my work, and I didn't want to be hungover and exhausted and not thinking clearly. When I was in my 20s in New York City, that did feel like a sacrifice. That was a hard ask. And it did take, I think, quite a bit of willpower to force myself to do that. And I didn't always win. I failed a lot at that. Sometimes a friend would call with a really, cool club that they wanted to go to that they could get us into or whatever, or some really great restaurant, and I would cave and I would say, yeah, that sounds amazing, let's do that. And we talk about sort of risk and reward with some of this stuff. Like we'll certainly talk about it with the sort of third strategy to this, which is taking even more time off. But even with this, there's some risk and reward, and it doesn't seem like it as much now in my life, but in my 20s, living in New York, it did feel like risk to sacrifice going out, to sacrifice, that time at those clubs and all the, amazing restaurants in New York, etc. The biggest one it always felt like a risk about was, but maybe tonight's the night I'm gonna meet the love of my life. In my 20s in New York, I thought that was gonna happen, on the subway, at the gym, walking down the sidewalk. I don't know. So that was always the ever-present risk that I might miss out on that. And maybe I did, actually, come to think of it. But it was sacrifice. It did take a lot of hard work. There were plenty of times, I have to admit it now, I feel a little bit bad about it, not that bad, that there were times where I knew going into a particular weekend that when friends, asked to do something on a Friday night or over the course of the weekend, I was saying to them that I had plans to go out of town. And I did not have plans to go out of town. I feel bad about those little fibs, I guess. But I had to do everything I could to be able to maintain the willpower to grab that time back and to focus it in on work, which is usually what we try to get away from on the weekends. And so, another thing that happens as we start grabbing back these hours in the morning to work on a project is it's wonderful. It's great to grab them back. But over time too, we start to want more, and not just because of like our general wanting more, but because sometimes it's hard to get into the flow, of the work that we're doing. For me, there were times where, especially like if it was a more complicated story I was writing, or just in general, sort of, getting your head around the forest for the trees and the trees for the forest of the story that you're telling, or whatever your project is, that alone would take a fair amount of time. And there were plenty of days where I felt like, oh, I'm just getting into it, and then my phone alarm would go off and it's time to, leave the coffee shop and go to work, go to the day job work. And even sometimes on weekends, after like a really tough work week at the office or what have you, I remember still there being some Saturdays where I would get so frustrated because I had set the day aside and I was trying to write, and I couldn't get in the right headspace. I sat there, at my little desk in Astoria, Queens, or sometimes I would, if it was nice out, I'd take a chair out to the park and sit there and try to write. But whatever it was, I couldn't get into the space. I couldn't get my head wrapped around things. I couldn't remember where I was in the forest, or remember, the minute interests of the character in that moment, or the trees for the forest, etc. And by the time I finally got into the right headspace, most of Saturday was over. I mean, that's happened. And then, you're down to Sunday to write. So there were times that, you want more and you want more. And so, the first step is to go from those hours in the morning to grabbing a full day, to grabbing a full weekend. But then I remember one summer, somebody else had done this, and I was like, oh, that's a genius idea. So I copied them. I had enough vacation days that summer after taking, I took 1 week of a actual vacation. And I had enough vacation days left that I could use those days to give myself summer Fridays that summer. And so I was able that summer to have 3-day weekends the entire summer. And that gave me even more time to really dig in, to spend all that time with my characters and with the story. I think there's this thing that it's like when people ask you, at parties or whatever, what do you do? And forever in New York in my 20s, I would always say whatever my current day job was. And it's hard to even convince yourself that first and foremost, you're a writer, or whatever your talent or your dream is. And a part of that, I think, even sort of more subconsciously, is, well, yeah, you only spend an hour in the morning on writing, and then you go and spend 8 hours or more at this office. So that's more of who you are. And so I think it even, in some ways, it helps your mind become more of who you are meant to be, to be able to have a full 24 hours, a full 48 hours, maybe 72 hours of just totally staying in that place of being this person that you want to be, of doing this work that you want to do. And it's not just while you're sitting there writing, or, working on your ballet or whatever it is, right? Like it's when you sleep at night, it's when you're eating your meals, it's when you're taking a shower, like your head is still in that space more. And it helps you, I think, to view yourself more as that person and as somebody engaged in that work as a part of your identity, and as a part of, as the focal point of your effort in life. So I think, over and above for me, the amount of words on the page that I was getting, or the amount of pages I was finishing, or whatever it is with your, if you're filming a video, how many hours you're getting in the can, so to speak. Over and above the increase in output and productivity, I think it helps you to, in your subconscious and, sort of deeper down inside, I think it helps you to understand yourself, to understand your own working life as being primarily about that thing versus being primarily about the day job stuff. So all this to say, we got to grab back the days now. We've grabbed back some hours in the morning. Now we've got to grab back some days, some full weekends, maybe even a 3-day weekend here and there. And to do that really does take intention. It really does take effort and focus and planning. It can't be viewed nonchalantly. It can't be viewed as like, yeah, I'll get around to it. It can't be something we wait to decide on until, we don't get any good offers on Friday night. And then we're like, okay, yeah, now I'll make the sacrifice. It needs to be something that we put a lot of intention into much earlier on and that we guard against. We need to protect that time. That time needs to become sacred to us. And so sit down with your notepads and plot out what you need to do. And if the apartment needs to be cleaned and laundry needs to be done, guess what? That's Wednesday night. That's not Saturday morning. We need to, again, put first things first. And so when we wake up on that weekend, we want to get our coffee or whatever it is that you do and give our fresh selves to this work that matters so much to us. So the next logical step in our search for time after days and weekends is, what if we found a week somehow? Well, what if we took a dream vacation? Of course, we always think about dream vacations as fun in the sun and partying. But what if we flip that idea around and say that instead it's a vacation to work on our dreams? That it can be a time to really focus and get a lot of work done, which is what I'm doing right now, finally finishing this video that I've wanted to make for a while. And to be honest, this has become a lot more fun for me these days than vacations filled with booze and partying. This is a lot more gratifying. So that's why all the fancy backgrounds in these videos. I'm currently on a dream vacation. Of course, I use my hours in the morning before work and my weekends to prepare for this, to think about the things that I wanted to say while I was here. And when I go back to the quote-unquote real world, I'll be using those hours in the morning and in the evening too, and in the weekends to edit this video and put it together and post it on YouTube. There's a lot that goes into this, and you can't get all the work done in paradise, maybe just the parts on camera. And then there's strategy 3, which is to take a lot more than an hour in the morning or a weekend or a week here and there, but to set yourself up to take at least a month and maybe several months at a time, maybe longer, to really just give your all every single day to your real work. For me, I kind of stumbled upon this strategy by accident back when I was working at my first big job in New York City, and we'll say I kind of quit. I was kind of fired. It was like a little bit of both, maybe. A little quit, a little fired. I'll probably talk in more detail about that another time, but for here, just to say, that job ended unexpectedly. So I went back to my very expensive apartment that I had gotten in New York City after getting this job, and thought to myself, crap, what the heck am I gonna do now? I had this, I just started this lease in this apartment. And long story short, for now, I ended up with these 3 months before I got my next full-time job, where I spent the first half of every day writing. The second half of every day I also spent writing, but they were cover letters and resumes. But yeah, over this period, I'd spend about half the day working on my projects and half the day applying for other jobs. And the truth is that, you know, it was an extremely scary time. I was worried sick in a lot of ways. You know, I didn't know it was only going to be 3 months, or you know, I hoped it was going to be a lot less than 3 months. 3 months actually, at the time, seemed like forever, as far as, you know, getting my next job was concerned. But looking back, I sometimes in my cheesier moments think about those 3 months as my 3 magical months in New York City, living on the Lower East Side, getting up every morning and going to my favorite bakery, the Clinton Street Bakery, before it became famous, to get my coffee and my morning muffin, and going back to my tiny little apartment on the Lower East Side and focusing on my writing. That was really the first time in my life where I spent a lot of quality time just focused on one thing. And that is the time period that I finished my first screenplay that did get some recognition and sort of start me down that whole path for many years. And so yeah, I sort of came to it a bit by accident at first, this idea of taking some time off from the working world. I was kind of pushed to take some time off from the working world. But over the years, I've used this strategy in a more planned way several times. And it has led to some of the most productive times in my life and some of the best times in my life, some of my favorite memories in life. So, you know, looking back at this point, and maybe there'll be more examples in the future, but so far I've done this, you know, sort of most significantly. I left another job, and I'll talk, you know, in the future about leaving jobs. I left another job and I went to Southeast Asia also for 3 months. I spent a month in Bali and a month in Thailand and a month in Vietnam, and fully immersed myself in writing another screenplay that I was working on then. And also, those are some of the greatest moments of my life, some of my greatest memories in life. Another time I took off to work on a novel. At some point I added writing a novel to my repertoire of attempts to be a writer. And this novel took place in Florida. And so I took a lot of time off, and I Airbnb'd places and in and around Florida, and spent a lot of time there writing that novel. And of course, another amazing time in my life that also I think fits into this category, even though it's a little bit different, were the years I was able to take off from the day job world and go back to being a student at UCLA when I got into UCLA Film School. And the time I spent there, in some ways, were the best years of my life. That's different because you're, you know, going back into the academic world and dealing with all of that. But nevertheless, a large chunk of time that you're taking back from this constant need to go to the 9 to 5 or 9 to 7, Monday through Friday, every day of your life. After sort of stumbling into this the first time around, I ultimately got turned on by a lot of people in this space to Tim Ferriss's seminal work, The 4-Hour Workweek, in which he describes these as mini retirements. That's his great phrase for them. You know, this idea of why are we, especially as Americans and other cultures too, so focused on, you know, working through our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and then finally in our 60s and 70s and 80s, maybe, if we're very fortunate and if all goes well and if the stock market treats us well, that maybe we might be able to retire and focus entirely on the things that we want to focus on with our time, with our days. Why not try to grab some of that back earlier on in life and have a mini version of that retirement sooner? And yes, maybe you're spending a lot of the money that you've saved up for that, and that will make it harder to ultimately retire when you're in your old age. But I recommend you read Tim Ferriss's great book. I'll put a link in, and there's a lot of arguments for it. And for me, I always go back to thinking about this amazing and very inexpensive villa that I had rented in Thailand, and it was on this island, and it was up these very steep steps. I mean, huge stone blocks, twice the size of what would be a step in most of America, and a lot of them. and I always remember thinking on that, carrying my big backpack and everything, and thinking, this is one of the many examples on this trip of things that I will never be able to do when I'm 80 years old. I seriously doubt it. My grandmother is 98 going on 99, and she could probably still do it. She's amazing. But most human beings, we might not be able to do that. And so, maybe you're saving up for that day that first of all, might not ever come in retirement for many reasons. And second of all, maybe you get it, and there's a lot of retired people that spend a lot of time on the couch, right? And is that really how I want to live those years? One of the things we look at when we decide whether or not to take these risks is that proposition of what is the value versus what is the risk. What's the reward versus what is the risk? And we have to remember too that there's also risk to banking in the standard life plan. I call it the BLP, the basic life plan, of work all those decades and then maybe you get to retire. There's a lot of risk in that. We might not be healthy enough to enjoy that retirement. We might also not be alive. And so in some ways you are locking in less risk by making sure that you enjoy these experiences now. So Tim Ferriss was a great resource in thinking about these as many retirements, which I often do. Also, having spent a lot of time in the academic world, both as a student and as a staff member, I do also like to think about them as sabbaticals, because for me, it's not a mini retirement just in the sense of, I'm going to spend this time now playing tennis or golf or whatever people do in retirement, but I'm really focused on a particular project. And that's what sabbaticals tend to be in academia, is someone going away from their job as a professor to write a book, to work on some very specific thing. And so I prefer to think of them as saving up for and then stepping away from your day job to take a sabbatical and focus on your dream project at that time. And there's a lot to consider when thinking about doing something like this, and I certainly hope to make several videos on this topic. You've got to think about your overall career trajectory of your day job career and what you're doing to it, and will you be able to come back from this if the project you go away to write or whatever it is that you're working on doesn't ultimately make you or immediately make you the proverbial $1 million, and you need to go back to the day job world afterwards. Planning ahead for all of that, thinking about that in depth, thinking about how it will look on your resume. Side note, one of the stints that I did in academia on the staff side were as a career services advisor. So I'm always also thinking about that and how will we, what's the backup plan, so to speak. And of course, you also need to build up the finances to do this. One of the great things is that by taking this time, you're often able to leave the very expensive locations that we tend to live in I've always lived in big cities in the US, and the rents aren't cheap. Life is not cheap in those places. And so, one of the great things about taking this time is you can often plan it that you can then spend that time in a place where the dollar goes further, right? But nevertheless, you're still going to need some dollars. And so, in my more frustrated times of being an employee, I've named, and I didn't certainly coin the term, but I began calling this my FU fund. It's that wonderful fund that allows you one day when you've had enough to say, F you, I'm out of here. And so I've always sort of, as soon as I get a new day job, I'm always thinking, okay, how am I putting money in the FU fund? How am I saving up a little here and there to have that option? So, there's so much to think about with this. There's your overall career, there's being able to build up that FU fund, there's this idea of spending that time in other places where the dollar goes further. And it's not just about locations where the dollar goes further. It's about locations that inspire you for your, for life in general, but also hopefully specifically for what you're currently working on, When I did the 3 months in Southeast Asia, the reason I picked the locations that I picked was because I was writing a screenplay about the digital nomad, sort of new way of living that was very popular at that time and still is popular, and I'm still kind of doing it a little bit myself here and there. But it was sort of, the beginning of that becoming a very popular idea, and I wanted to write a TV series about it, and that's one of the reasons I spent the time in the places that I did. But not even that, not even just, as a direct inspiration for what you're writing, but are there like-minded people there? When I was in Bali, there was this amazing co-working space called Dojo. Loved Dojo, missed Dojo. To the best of my knowledge, Dojo did not survive COVID. I think that's why they closed up. I'll have to research that. If they're back, I'm going back. But there are lots of these, co-working spaces that you can find and interesting, fun places around the world where you'll be around like-minded people who are getting up in the morning and getting their coffee and getting to work. And that, it's kind of funny that, in some ways we want to, or in many ways we want to escape, the office culture of our day jobs, and then we get halfway around the world and we do still sort of crave that sense of community at work, right? Other people also working hard on their dreams helps to inspire us. And so it's a bit of an irony that we run so far away from the offices, for me in the US, to get, halfway around the world and then want something of that culture of people coming together to work on their own individual projects, for that energy. And it's not just about, that places like Dojo and others had, a swimming pool in the middle of them and, acai bowls and great coffee. A lot of offices in the US, not a lot actually, but some offices in the US have tried to, have more of an entertaining workplace, so to speak, and to provide, snacks and goodies and things to make the office a bit more like that, a bit more inviting. And it doesn't quite work. It's not quite the same for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that at your day job, you still have a boss. And when you're off on your sabbatical, depending on how you do things, but usually, at least for me anyway, when I'm off on my sabbatical, I don't have a boss anymore. And that makes all the difference. And just a quick point to say, I'm making a YouTube video. I want it to look nice. I'm showing a lot of the nicer backgrounds. But I just want to take a moment to be real and to make sure that I've reiterated Stephen King's point about putting your desk against the wall and getting to the work. Yes, I do spend a lot of time in nice coffee shops or, sitting on the beach or whatever when I'm on these trips, generating ideas and thinking sort of big picture. But a lot of the work needs to be where you're not looking at fancy pools or whatever else. You're not having that distraction. You're focused in on the actual work that you need to get done. So Stephen King says, put your desk against the wall and get focused. And even when I was in Southeast Asia for those months and having the time of my life, there was a period where I Airbnb'd a small apartment in Chiang Mai, of course, in Thailand, that had a very small desk, smaller than this, I think, that was sort of built into a little teeny alcove in the bedroom with no windows. And I spent an awful lot of time, despite all the beauties of Thailand, which I did go see, but I spent a lot of time at that little desk focused on the words on the page. So that's it. Those are the three main strategies that have helped me so far through all this. And they all sound so simple, but they're deceiving in how simple they sound. Because I think that they are each very hard won and have to be won again and again and again each time. But I know that my days are better. Every day is better when I have started it off in the morning writing. I can deal with some of the more boring meetings at the office or some of the more mundane tasks because I know I've locked that time in the morning. I've locked that work in the morning, and the day is already a success because of that. And I know that my weeks are better when I spent the weekend previously getting more pages done, more words on the page. And I think ultimately all of these bits of time that I've been able to steal back have helped to make my whole life better. At the very least, they've led to a ton of great experiences. Many of the best experiences of my life, actually. So I'm grateful for all of that time in and of itself. And I do think also that they have helped me to make some progress towards hopefully making this thing happen one day, whatever exactly that means.